Agriculture is the leading contributor to nutrients and sediment entering the bay every year. After all, there's about 83,000 farms in the area, and they cover about 30% of the land. Every year, agriculture contributes about 40% of the nitrogen that enters the bay and 60% of the phosphorus that enters the bay. I feel like a broken record because I keep on mentioning nutrients and how bad they are for the bay, but the nutrients will fuel algae blooms, which will ultimately deplete oxygen and kill shell and finfish in the bay. And sediment is bad because it will cloud the water and affect clarity. That can impact submerged aquatic vegetation, and they create oxygen, and they provide a habitat for other species in the bay. Um, so nutrients come from manure and fertilizer, and sediment can come from tilling practices. We have a lot of the answers on how to solve some of these problems with agriculture and its impact on the bay. It's just difficult to implement them because there are so many farms, and a lot of these practices are just voluntary from farmers. So let's take a look at how Maryland is promoting some of these better management practices.
So there's a bunch of different areas that Maryland focuses on when it comes to agricultural impacts on the bay. Overall, the state provides grants to farmers to cover up to 100% of the costs to implement some better management practices that reduce nutrient and sediment runoff into the Chesapeake. There's nearly 40 different practices that can be covered, meaning that there's almost 40 different changes that a farmer can make to their land that the state will reimburse them for. I simply cannot cover all of them in such a short video, but I'll go over some of the biggies with you. One of the most successful practices that has worked out throughout Maryland is the use of cover crops. Cover crops control soil erosion and runoff, and they even improve the health of the soil by locking in nutrients and keeping them from washing away. The crops are usually planted after the summer harvest and can include rye, barley, or other cereal grains. So to keep it simple, cover crops lock in nutrients and they keep sediment from entering the bay. Between 2020 and 2021, around 433 acres of cover crops were planted in the state, and over $19 million in grants funded funded farmers to cover that cost. Cover crops are part of a larger picture when it comes to conservation tillage versus conventional tillage, which you can see here. You can see how easy it might be for a heavy rainstorm to wash some of the soil away. So just imagine if there was manure or nutrients on top of that soil that would just easily be washed into the streams. Cover crops are a great way to protect the bay and improve soil health, but there's also some demand for a more fixed solution. Currently, the state is looking at legislation that would improve a more equitable funding for long-term landscape solutions like tree buffers and adding grass pastures to land. Right now, about 80% of funding for these types of projects goes towards cover crops, so the state is working on making sure long-term solutions are being funded as well. Adding a buffer around streams and rivers on farms is really important in protecting the bay. Just like cover crops, buffers around a stream significantly reduce sediment and nutrient runoff. And as a bonus, it's one of the most cost-effective ways to do so. And as a bonus, it can help prevent flooding and erosion by slowing down and absorbing water. Buffers can include grasses, reeds, shrubs, and trees. I visited a couple farms, and all of them seemed to include buffers around the streams, which was nice to see. States in the Chesapeake watershed have committed to buffering 70% of the rivers and streams by 2025, which is about 900 miles of buffer a year, which is pretty impressive. In 2022, Maryland is providing farmers with $4,500 per acre to install riparian buffers, and these buffers must include pasture fencing. It's almost like the flip side of the same coin, but pasture fencing around streams keeps livestock and their waste from entering the water. Basically, you've got to keep your cows out of the river if you don't want them using it as a toilet. Not only that, but it's going to help protect the stream banks from damage and erosion from the animals. But really, the easiest way to keep animal waste and nutrients from entering the water is by keeping the livestock from entering it in the first place. This brings me to one more important topic, and that's manure and poultry litter management. livestock manure and poultry litter account for about half of the nutrients entering the bay. And while they are a great natural fertilizer and soil conditioner, they can be easily overapplied. So farms are monitored and checked to make sure that the phosphorus levels aren't putting crops at risk for over-enrichment. Maryland has a manure transport program that provides grants to farmers to move manure from farms with high levels of phosphorus in their soil to farms that have low levels, or to other facilities that can use it. A few years ago, about $1.5 million of funding went into transporting nearly 250 tons of manure to approved farms and businesses. 21% of that was poultry litter. The program has been really successful, and we've seen some extraordinary growth in the last few years. It's important that manure that isn't being transported is being stored properly, usually in tanks or away from water sources. When it's applied, it's traditionally placed on top of the soil, where it's at risk of being washed away. But newer technologies out there actually apply the manure into the soil, which keeps it from washing away. This technique can prevent 12% of nitrogen and 36% of phosphorus from getting into the water stream versus the surface application. So yeah, there are a lot of different practices, but these are some of the bigger focuses that Maryland has when it comes to agriculture and the health of the Chesapeake. The nearly 40 better management practices that the state will provide funding for, most of them fall within these three categories. That is, 1, cover crops, 2, river buffers and fencing, and 3, manure transport, storage, and application.